Tricky and Mary Catherine. Tricky's not much of a lap dog, but she wanted to come say hello. She's such a sweet girl and a pretty girl. Say good morning, Tricky. Okay, you ready to get down? Oh, kisses. Okay, Bobo, you want to come up? Bobo says good morning too. He's so much lighter to hold. He's not very heavy. Good morning, Bobo. Are you my little boy? Yes, you are. He says, happy weaving, happy spinning, happy doing whatever you're doing. Now he's looking back the other way. The only reason they're interested in me is because their daddy's gone to town. Okay, Bobo. Well, good morning. I thought you might want to see the dogs. I'm back in my studio, and today I am going to finish a weave of a houndstooth pattern. So if you're interested in doing a houndstooth pattern, then this is a video for you. If you've already seen one of my weaving videos, this may be long and tedious. It's up to you to watch it. I've also interspersed some photographs of some of the things we've been eating lately, which might be fun to look at. And I knew you'd like to see the dogs. So, without any other yapping, let's get on to it. Good morning, YouTube friends. This is Mary Catherine at Red Robin Farm, and today I am warping up a houndstooth pattern on my Ashford rigid heddle loom. And I have my loom set up kind of at waist height using a dresser and an open dresser drawer to support it. And I have a stick on this other side out of the camera range. This is the back stick. This is the back roller, because it does roll around like that on the cog. And then there's a heavy back rail, which is the base of the loom, and it's resting behind that dresser drawer. So without further ado, I want to show you how I'm going to do this houndstooth pattern. You begin by tying your warp yarn to the back stick. And you kind of have to know about how wide you want your scarf to be, or whatever piece you're weaving. I want this to be a scarf. It's going to be in a dark blue and a very deep red. And this time I want the blue on the outside edges. I want a band of blue on the outside, and then my true houndstooth in the middle. So we will start. Here's my little hooking mechanism, and I put it through the reed, or the heddle. That's what this is, resting in its block. Okay. And I am feeding this hook through these little this slot and pulling it through. And I have the yarn coming out from above, which works well for me. This is a center feed from the skein. And I'm going to pull this all the way to the stick at the other end of the room, which is down there, and wrap it around that little peg. And that will create some tension on my warp. And you see that back stick flops around like that. Eventually the tension of this warp will hold it nice and taut. Now when I bring this yarn back, this is the returning yarn, I'm going to loop it around that back stick next to the first yarn that I tied, and hold it. And then with this hand, I reach through the reed, the next slot in the reed, and I pull the yarn again. Grab that loop with this, and then I pull it again. I actually have two yarns going through. The yarn that goes through first, and then the yarn that comes in return. So I've done now 4. This will be the 5th pull. Tie off this blue yarn for now. And so before I do that, I just want to make sure that I've really got the tension I want. I can adjust the tension when later, but I want to make sure that I've got it pretty good now. So I cut the yarn off, and then I tie this little piece of yarn to itself at the end. This is the place where it's easy to have a yarn that's too loose. Okay, so that's pretty good. And at this point, I'm going to start my back and forth. This is the tedious part, a back and forth pattern between this dark blue and this lovely dark red. And I'm using Simply Soft yarn. It's nice and slick, it weaves well, it's very consistent, it's very soft to wear. I find it to be a lovely yarn to weave with. Okay, so now I will tie the red yarn on with a good secure knot. And in the very next slot in the reed, I pull just one shot, one pass of red. Again, one pass of red gives me 2 strings, okay? And then I'm going to cut that off and tie it up, because this is by far the most time-consuming part of doing a houndstooth pattern, is whatever the center part of your scarf or throw or shawl is, you're going to be doing this back and forth. I'm going to go to blue and red and blue and red until I've completed the center panel of my scarf. And we'll fast forward through that. warp done, I want to show you what it looks like on the back stick. All those different knots in the middle. I have 10 blue slots on this side and 10 on this side, and then in here I have 8 red with blues, of course, in the middle. So I pretty much have 16 here. And that looks kind of wide for a scarf, but you have to remember that when you get done with the weaving, they're all going to be close together. So if you want to see a spot in this warp, which tapers down to a point there, if you want to see the spot that shows you how wide your scarf will be, look about here on this back roller, where the yarns are pretty close together. That's about how wide it's going to be, which is a nice width for a scarf. So I think this will be good. This will be a primarily blue one with red accents. And I will roll this up with my husband's help. I'll cut the strings down there. And I'll operate the roller, the back roller here, while my husband holds all these yarns pretty tight. He's going to keep the tension on them while I'll roll it up on the roller. And then I'll be able to take this loom down and put it on the table, where it'll be so much easier to work with. So my husband and I'll do that next. I'm not going to videotape that because we'll be all in this room and there won't be any space. But I'll show you what that looks like when we're done. Okay, we're back here with my loom and my weave, and with my husband's help, I cranked up the back stick with the little gear over there, right here, and rolled all of that warp onto the back stick, while my husband held the yarn like he was riding a horse with 2 reins, and he puts a good bit of tension on it while I crank it down. And it may seem ridiculous to do that when, as soon as we get done, I mean, I've already cut the ends, and then he drops them when they get to a certain stage, and they're so loose. But you need to remember that the tension is still present on the back stick, okay, on that back roller. So all of those yarns are still under some tension, and now I will also put these under tension as I attach these yarns to the front stick down here. The next thing that I have to do is I need to look at these pairs and take 1 yarn from each pair and separate it out and pull it through this little hole in this reed. And this is when I use the other end of this little hook. Depending on the yarn, this can be a little tricky. This is simply soft yarn, which is nice and thin. If your yarn is really thick, it can be hard to get it through there. If it splits easily, that can be an issue. But we will hurry through this step since it's a little tedious. And after you've seen me do 3 or 4 of them, I think it becomes obvious what's going on. Alright, now I'm finally done with that little yarn threader, the little thing that goes through the reed, and now I'm ready to tie off into knots little groups or clusters of these yarn. Alright, so I'm going to separate out just 4 of these strands. The 4 top ones go through the holes and the 4 bottom ones go through the slots. And you can see here how, depending on how I move this heddle, see how those 4 that are in the slots can go up above those 4 and down below those 4. That's what makes weaving work, okay? And we'll see that later. But I'm going to take these 4, and I'm going to tie a knot in them down at this end. Here's the front stick, okay, that flaps around just like the one on the other end. And I'm going to try to do a knot that doesn't quite reach that front stick. Just like that, okay? And then I'm going to take groups of 4 on the top, 4 on the bottom, like this. And I'm going to continue knotting them down at the bottom here across. And I really want to try to make sure, if possible, that the knots are even with each other, coming across as much as I can. Now along my back stick, I've got a doubled over piece of sturdy string over here that's looped around my front stick. This is looped around my front stick. And then I'm going to take this, pass it through. See how I've split this yarn? So there's like a loop through here, and I'm going to take this string and pass it through there. And this is where I create the tension on this end. This is really important. You want to really get some good, it should be enough tension that this front stick holds itself straight out, okay? And so I pass it through there, and then I pass it underneath the front stick, and then I pass it through the middle of this clump of yarn in my warp. And I'll tighten this up later. Right now I'm just getting it started back underneath the front stick. This is the front stick because it's going to be closer to my body when I'm weaving. And back through that knot. See how much tension's on there? It'll pull that loom right off. You can also do this sitting down and have it braced against your body. Afraid I'm going to run out. Nope, I don't have enough. All right, now as I hold this end, I'm going to go back and tighten all these. It also is not a bad idea to trim these ends off because otherwise they're going to get all wrapped up around this front roller as you weave, and they'll just create bulk, which you might not want. And you can press on this and feel if the tension is consistent among all these yarns as they come down. But this is your last chance, in a way, to create a consistent tension throughout your whole warp. Now, you certainly don't want to create so much tension that you break your yarn or damage your yarn. And then this is what I do for knots. I do several of these. Put it underneath, make a loop, pull it through. It's probably overkill. I usually tend to do too much of something rather than too little. Okay, so now that is the warp completed. I'm going to cut these strings off, but that's pretty much done. And then we can start to weave. Okay, YouTube friends, we're back to continue working on this houndstooth pattern. I've got my warp drawn onto my loom. I just want to make the point that these gears on either side with their little locks are so important to preserving the tension and adjusting the tension. I can crank this back and make this tighter or looser. They're just really important. So now I'm going to take my reed, my rigid heddle, out of the resting position and put it in its up shed, as they call it. And I'm going to put some excess yarn down here to, in my very first few rows. I'll be pulling these out later, but for now, they do a good job of getting me up to a spot in the weave where everything is nice and even. You kind of want to shove these down and toward these knots, which are not very consistent in spite of all your best efforts. You'll have some inconsistencies in your knotting. So you want to shove those down. Let me go ahead and cut some of these. They're a bit long. And then we move to the bottom shed. And again, you pass them through. On a scarf, you can do that just with your hands because it's not very far. You can meet in the middle. But if you're doing something like a shawl or a table runner, something bigger, a panel, then you would need probably one of your shuttles to help you get through that middle. And after I get about 3 of these in here, I'm going to go ahead and use my reed to help me shove these down like that. And the more of these you do, the more you'll see the weave even up. This also gives you some excess yarn at the bottom that will give you enough for your fringe afterward, which is important. You'll have to have fringe. I've only made one scarf. It was a circular scarf that went all the way around your neck, where I actually tried to finish off the ends, but that was not easy. Okay, so now I've got my trash yarn in there. And now what I want to do is I want to roll the bottom of this weave back onto my front roller here so that I can start my weave. I've got the heddle in the rigid position, in the resting position. I'll try to do it this way so you can see what I'm doing. I'm rolling that down. I don't want to roll it all the way around, just to get it down there. So now I've cranked my gear up here, nice and tight. And then in order to do a houndstooth probably, I like to have a nice big bar of either red or blue at the bottom. Trying to figure out what I want to do with that. Okay, it's been a while since I've woven a houndstooth pattern, and I went back and looked at some photographs of some old scarves I have done before and realized that I really do want to have a solid blue ground, because the only place you're going to have the solid blue is in the 4 corners, here, here, and the top 2 corners. Everywhere else in the scarf is going to be a combination of blue and red, and so I'm going to go ahead and begin with my blue down here. The only thing is you really have to keep track of how much you do down here, because you have to do the same amount on the top so that the 2 ends of the scarf match. And so you can't just launch into your weave down here without noting how many times you pass. Sorry if I bumped the camera. So we're going to go ahead and do our base at the bottom. I'll probably have a nice band like that, and I'll keep count and tell you how many sheds I do. Don't forget to pinch your corners a little bit so you don't want to pull this edge yarn in. You want to make sure that it stays nice and straight, not too loose. You don't want it to be floppy. That's the one that's hard to keep the tension on. So make sure you keep tension on these ones over here as you're warping up. But when you're weaving, be gentle with them and don't pull them too tight. Okay, I'll get back to you soon. Okay, we're back with our houndstooth pattern. And I've started to get into the pattern now, and I wanted to just remind you of some important things. When you start with your base color, make sure you leave yourself a little tail so you can weave that in later. And when you add your complementary color, make sure you leave a tail there as well. I can use a little embroidery needle or something to weave that back in later. Okay. And what I want to make this point that you're going to have corner blocks that are solid of your base color. And you're going to have this fun stripy pattern here. And you're going to have that same fun stripy pattern all the way up until you get to the far corner. And the real houndstooth pattern is here in the middle. Okay? And the way this is accomplished, after I did my first red pass over and back, I've done 2 of those now. And so I just finished with a red pass, okay? And you want to make sure that your next color, when you put the shuttle in, that this yarn, the new yarn, lays on top of the previous yarn, okay? And this will give you this nice kind of twirled effect on this edge. It'll be very pretty. It also has the effect of kind of capturing that previous yarn and keeping it snug, okay, on the edge. When I weave, I always have my reed up, my heddle up when I come from this side, and down in the bottom slot when I come from the left side. That's just kind of my habit, and it helps keep me organized. Okay, so I just finished my blue. Then I have to take my 2 shuttles, kind of swap them around. This is why you have to concentrate a little bit on this one. Make sure that the red one now is laying on top of the blue one. The red yarn on top of the blue one. Pull the blue one out a little bit straight. Make sure the red one is nice and snug, but you don't want to, again, you don't want to yank that one in, so you give yourself a little bit of extra. Come down. And this is what I'm going to do all the way, the full length of the scarf, until I get to the other end. And I mentioned counting how much border you have here at the bottom, but it's really easy to do because you can count the little red dots as you go up. You can see the stitches very easily because in the middle here, because of the contrasting red and blue, and I'll show you that in just a second. So before I continue with my weave and boogie on down this warp, let me show you a close-up of what's going on here. Here's that alternating pattern you see here. This is why it's so easy to count how many rows I have here. I just count these, like perhaps this one here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's about how much I've got there, okay? And so you got a nice solid block here. You've got the fun stripes. And this is the houndstooth. This is what you accomplish when you do that alternating pattern. And it's a nice square of red in the middle with this little tooth coming out on each side. It's really fun. This is what your edge is going to look like. See how it's beginning to swirl up like that? That's really pretty. It's just a very elegant pattern. I've found it's always popular to sell these at the market, and so I'll show you when I get close to the end. about weaving is that you don't have to tie a knot or anything. When you get to whatever yarn you're using, you just kind of bind it off in the weave. So I'm going to take this end and draw it in here as if it weren't the end. Just taking it as far as I can go. Okay. And I've put some more blue on my blue shuttle. And then you're just going to pass it through the same way, letting this end overlap just a little bit, because when you pull down, the two ends are going to pull apart, and it's really good. It's important if they overlap a little bit. And that is how you change yarn. And it really does just blend it right in there. You really cannot see, you can't see those ends. If you ever did have an end that was rather long, you could take some little scissors and very carefully snip it, but oh so carefully, because if you snip any of this yarn, then you're in a bad way. And let me show you one more thing, just for fun. So I'm on the red part of the pattern. And let's say I'm watching TV or listening to an audiobook or something, and I kind of lose track of what I'm doing. And I do my red, and then I forget to switch to my blue. And I just put my red in like that. And then I pull it down and I go, oh, ooh, that's actually so pretty. But I go, oh, no, I can't do that. All you have to do is make sure you put your reed back in the same position you just did, and you just pass your shuttle back through and pull it through. It's that easy to fix. It is so easy to fix. So you just pass it back through the way that you just did. I just feel, I just challenge you, if you're a knitter or a crocheter, to undo a row of your work as fast as that. It is amazing. And weaving just gives you this beautiful, really elegant, finished look. It's the flatness of the weave that is so fine. You can just barely see, I can see in the camera, you can see those ends. From here, it really doesn't look that obvious. See, now I'm holding the camera right above the work, and you really can't see where those ends are at all. Okay, we will finish up in a minute. All right, I'm getting toward the end of my weave. If we look here at the top, you can see, actually you can see on the floor, that all of my little pieces of cardboard that act as a buffer for these warp yarns as I roll it up on the back stick, they've all dropped out, which means I'm getting pretty close. If you look here, there's really very little yarn left here. I don't want to get this all the way around to the point where this connecting point is here and the yarns are coming straight out, because they will not work in the heddle very well. But one thing I need to do is make sure that I leave a block of solid blue here before I tie this off. And as you recall, I need to have 9 red passes, or 9 solid blue passes before I do that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish up this little bit of red on here, and then I'll load some more blue on my shuttle and finish that off. And by the time I get to there, that should be just about right for cutting, and I'll have plenty for my fringe. So we're getting to the end. we have finished our weave. I have snipped off all those ends that you saw and tied my row of knots at the end of the weave. I've also left these tails. I'm going to be weaving them back in using a nice darning needle. And this is a nice long scarf, as you see, lots of folds. And so now we get back to the first end of our scarf here. And I've also freed it from the front stick, the front roller. And now I am removing all of this trash yarn that was just taking up space. And of course this is where my tassels on this end will be. And now I will untie all of these base knots that I started with because we don't want them, and then I'll retie smaller knots. And of course this red end will need to be woven in with a needle. And now with the magic of YouTube, it's instantly done. Ta-da! Look at that. All right. It's important to remember when you're knotting up your warp on the end for your fringe that this is not just decorative. These knots really are the base of your warp and they hold everything in place. This last little pass of weft yarn can get quite loose and insecure. As you see, here's my tail, and it can get a little scary. So the purpose of these knots is really to hold down your weft yarn at the end. But make sure that you don't pinch it. Everything in a weave should really lie flat, especially in something like a houndstooth. And so these knots are designed to do that and to secure that weft yarn at the end. And it takes a little bit of practice to get good at getting them all the way down to the base. As you see, I did a bad job. This one right here, I'm going to have to redo and pull down. But the rest of them really are nice and it lies flat. And I'll be able to weave this back in well.